Hey there neighbors, Kevin here with eTrailer, and today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the DeeMaxx disc brake kit with actuator here on our 2025 Coachmen Chaparral Fifth Wheel trailer. So if you're like our neighbor today, man, you've got a really big fifth wheel, you got a whole lot of weight behind your tow vehicle, and it's not always easy to really stop that weight when you need to, especially in those emergency situations. So swapping over from that outdated drum brake technology up to some disc brakes from DeeMaxx is going to give you that stopping power so you can make the difference and not crash into the person that's in front of you when you're out on the road and having to slam on the brakes. So this kit is going to include everything you need for a TA Maxwell trailer. It's going to have the disc brake, rotor and hub assembly. You'll have your mounting bracket for the caliper, and then also those brake pads inside of there. From there, it's just going to be some soft lines running all the way over to some T's on the other side and then up to your actuator. So it does make it a pretty easy install. You're not having to use any hard lines where you're bending the line and potentially kinking it or having any other kind of flaring issues if you didn't get it just right. So this one is definitely one I'd recommend, obviously, if you are switching over to disc brakes. Now, a lot of people will look at the cost of upgrading from an electric drum brake assembly over to a hydraulic disc brake assembly and say, is it really worth it? And just to kind of alleviate that confusion for you, what's going to happen with this is disc brakes are going to bite a lot quicker. There's going to be a lot more force on it. We're talking about a huge PSI difference. So typically with drum brakes, especially when it's hydraulic there, you're getting 1,000 PSI to a drum brake, whereas with disc brakes, you're getting 1,600 PSI. So we're getting that faster bite. We're getting a lot shorter of a stopping distance here. And then the other main part of this is when it comes to maintenance, these are a lot easier to work on because you're not replacing as many parts. Things don't kind of break down the same way as it would with a drum brake assembly. Now your rotors eventually will need to be replaced, but for the most part, those are going to live on here for a really long time compared to your brake shoes on a electric drum brake assembly. And the nice thing about this is the brake pads that you're going to be using are super simple to pop out. So this is something where in the past, maybe you didn't feel comfortable swapping out your drum brake assembly and adjusting it and making sure that it is correct, whereas now all you have to do is pop your wheel off, pop out the two bolts in our caliper, and then you can pull the whole caliper back, take those two brake pads out, swap them out, pop it back on, and you're all ready to go, and you didn't have to pay somebody to do it. So it's going to save you a lot of money. Now, the other thing here that kind of differentiates DeeMaxx from some of the other brands out on the market is that they also have holes drilled into the hat portion of the rotor and hub assembly. And what that does is it's not only allowing for better heat dissipation and allowing water to escape, so that way water's not getting trapped in here. The heat dissipation in that is really going to be killer because that's going to help avoid burning up all your grease that you have and potentially wearing any of the other components around it. Your tires are the biggest thing where heat is a problem. So if you can kind of minimize that, air this out a little bit better, not have a bunch of, a super hot hub on here, just heating up the wheel as well, it's going to help overall maintaining the rest of your components. And then the other factor here is that when they're doing their powder coating, they're dipping these, and on the other hubs, they don't have those holes. So what happens is you form an air pocket in there, and then they're having to dip it multiple times, maybe sand some stuff out, dip it again, and they're just not getting a really even coat across the entirety of the hub and rotor. Whereas with DeeMaxx, they don't have that problem because they can dip it in with those holes, allow all that air to escape, pull it back out, and dip it. They have a 3 dipping process with it, and that coating is going to give you a 1,000-hour salt spray rating. So this also makes it really good for marine applications. As far as the install goes, this one is kind of just preparation is the big thing here. It's not really super challenging. You are really just getting your trailer lifted, letting the axles hang so you can get your wheels off, and then kind of pulling out your old hub assembly, taking your electric brakes off, making sure that you cut that connection so that way there's no power running from the junction box back here to where it could potentially short out and then throw some codes inside your vehicle. Aside from that, probably the more challenging part here is really just the connections with your brake lines. So a lot of time you really want to crank down on these, but with these being brass fittings, it's really easy to overdo it and you'll strip the threads, and then now you have a bunch of leaks. You're having to replace more than just a fitting because now it's the whole hose, or maybe it's even to a T or one of the fittings on your brake caliper. So This is one where you just kind of have to be patient, but it's something where you could easily get it done in probably a day or two, especially if you have some extra hands helping you out. You can definitely get it done a lot quicker. Once you get through popping off the old assembly, popping on the new one, and you kind of get the hang of it, it is a fairly easy install. But that being said, you don't always have the space to do it. You might not have the tools. You might not have a line wrench so that you can tighten that down properly. So if that is the case for you, definitely feel free to use our dealer locator, and you can find a shop near you to get it professionally installed. If you are wanting to do this yourself, then stick around and I'll help walk you through the process. To start off our install, we have to first remove our hub and drum assembly, and that's going to be a little dirty. So grab yourself a big box of shop towels, bunch of gloves, because we're going to be swapping them in and out as we grease things, some needle nose pliers, a rubber mallet, and we're also going to need a torque wrench. We'll need an 1.5-inch socket to get the axle nut off, and then a few other tools, but we can get to that a little bit later. So starting out, we got a rubber mallet, and we're going to be tapping on the grease cap, but we want to hit this almost at like a 45-degree angle towards ourselves. And while I'm doing that, I'm also going to spin it, and that's going to help kind of pry this out without damaging it. So just like so. And I typically like to just have a little towel sitting out already below to catch everything, especially if I'm going to be reusing any parts. Now for our setup today, we're going to be reusing the cotter pin, the axle nut, and then the axle washer that's right behind the axle nut. The rest of this we're just going to toss because we're not going to be reusing the bearings, and the grease seal, all that's going to get just tossed with our hub and drum assembly here. Now this one is a Terran axle, so this one is even using a different grease than what we offer here. So we really need to make sure that we're doing a good job cleaning this out because we don't want to contaminate our new grease. So another thing you might want to grab is a couple of cans of some brake clean, because that's what I'll usually use to just kind of clean stuff out. So starting off with our cotter pin, we're going to bend that back down. It's usually a fight to get it out. Sometimes you got to kind of tap it out a little bit. So having a hammer or that rubber mallet can also help. And then you can start to pry on it from the top with your pliers too. But like I said, sometimes these just want to fight you the whole way. Sometimes they'll just slip right out on you. This is going to be one where we're going to fight probably. There we go. If you got any grease on that, clean it off. Here's where that 1.5-inch socket comes into play. We're going to use that to pop off our axle nut. Same thing, we'll wipe this out. If you got a lot of grease, or maybe it's a little bit older of a trailer and there's a lot of gunk kind of in there, this is where you really be spraying it out. This one I believe is brand new right from the dealer. I can't really tell if they had done anything with it yet just because it's just so clean. So that makes me believe that this is probably straight to us. From there we got our flat washer, which I'm also going to wipe down. These are the three components we're going to be saving. You could technically save the grease cap too, especially since I didn't beat it up too bad trying to get it off, but we're swapping over completely, and the DeeMaxx brakes that we have are going to come with some new ones. So I'll probably just clean these off and throw them to the side, so that way if our neighbor ever needs to replace it, he just has a spare backup already ready to go, and he's not having to spend a couple bucks getting a new one. Set that aside, and now just start tossing the outer bearing. I'll wipe my hands again, and then we can pull our whole hub out. So you can kind of wiggle it just a bit, pull it back. And one thing I noticed on the opposite side of this trailer was that grease had completely blown out of the seal and was all over the brakes. And this is a brand new trailer, so that's not what we want to see. That means somebody was using a powered grease gun, like a battery powered or some other kind and just completely blew out the seal. So brand new, right off the line, and it's already trash. This one, you can see grease is in there. So they didn't do the best job greasing this up and properly sealing it. So this is one where you might start to see a loss of braking power, because once grease gets on these brake shoes and on the actual pad itself, it's pretty much toast. You can't fix it. It's just replace only at that point. So make sure you're not overdoing it when you are using that grease zerk fitting on the front here. It's not meant to fully repack the whole bearing here. It's just a cavity fill, so that way you don't have anything else kind of getting into that pocket and potentially damaging the spindle. But once you got that off, we can wipe down some of it. I'm gonna grab my grease gun too, and I'm gonna clean out our grease zerk fitting, because for the whole length of the spindle up till this little opening right here is gonna be full of this same grease. And we don't want that mixing in with our new grease. So you can see it coming out. We're gonna go until that's nice solid red. Well, I'll probably have to grab my towel, kind of wipe some of that away before it gets too big. There we go. Now for the threads, I find that like these paper style shop towels don't do the best at cleaning them out. So I also have a rag I'm gonna grab and use that to clean out the threads here too. Got my cloth towel here. That's done a much better job of cleaning out the threads. I'll also take my cotter pin and I'll shove it through that little hole that we have there. There'll be more grease inside of there, and plus a little bit of the paper towels. So now's also a great time to sit here and inspect your spindle. So the outer bearing, that first bearing we pulled off, it's gonna ride right here. So this is your first journal, is what they call it. And we wanna just kind of double check, see if there's any scratches, dents, anything like that, where we can get our fingernail into it. If you can get your fingernail into it, it is now what we'd classify as trash. So at that point, you're buying a new axle. So it's super important to repack your bearings regularly, check your stuff, make sure that everything is functioning how it should, to avoid these kind of issues later on in replacing a whole axle when it's something you could have just handled with some routine maintenance. Now the inner bearing, that's gonna ride up here, right where that grease zerk opening is for our grease to come through. And then up on this journal, this is where our grease seal sits, just right behind that grease mark. So you can see there's a little bit of a scorch mark on here already on the spindle. Might not be too much to worry about. There's no scratches, gouges, anything like that. This spindle looks really good. So I'm not concerned about any of that. So at this point, now we can move on to our brake assembly. We're gonna have to pop this out, and there's gonna be 5 bolts. Typically gonna be a 9/16 socket. And we're actually gonna be completely replacing our studs as well, because they're gonna come in a kit. We'll have some stainless steel ones. So I'd also recommend picking up some anti-seize. We've got like a little stick of it over here that I'll show you in just a sec once we get those new studs ready. Once you have those nuts removed, you can carefully pull off the brake assembly. You may not be able to pull it fully off, depending on how they wired it up. So it looks like in this case, I'm not gonna be able to pull it enough before cutting it. So I'm gonna get back behind here, and I try to snip on the wires for our brake magnet and not on the factory side. So that way, if for whatever reason, if anyone ever came back here and wanted to get rid of the disc and switch back to drums, they'd still have all that wiring there, and they can easily just reconnect right to it. So we have these little connectors right here that I could cut the wire off of, but I'm gonna snip it a little bit further back because I know we aren't saving these brake assemblies. And what I'm gonna do after is just electrical tape over that to seal it off. We can pull our whole assembly off. And what I like to do is just drop it right back down into the hub. That way it's a little bit easier to throw it away. Now we need to punch out our old studs here. You could honestly do it with a hammer. I just don't want to potentially hit the spindle here, so I'm using a punch with it. So here's the stainless steel bolts that are going to replace our studs. I've got a little stick of anti-seize, and I'm gonna rub some of that on here. We'll also have some nylock nuts to go along with this. So for our caliper bracket, we need to have this either at 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock, with the bracket side here that our caliper is going to hook up onto facing towards the rear of the trailer. So for our passenger side that we're on right now, that would mean we need to be at the 9 o'clock position. If we were on the driver's side, it would then be the 3 o'clock instead. So we'll get this lined up. We'll pass through our new studs. And like I said, I like to get like one of them in at least and get that nut started so that way this won't fall off on us. And then from there, just hit each one out of 5. Using a 9/16 socket and wrench, we are going to snug each one of these down. They don't list a torque for this, but they do say to get it nice and tight. So I like to just come back with the hand wrench and just really snug it down till I feel like it's tight enough. Our next step is going to be getting our hub and rotor all set up and ready to go. I've also got my bearings for the other one that I'm going to do next, so that way I can grease this all up at once and not get my hands dirty multiple times. Right here I have a bearing packer, which makes it a whole lot quicker and easier to actually pack our bearings. Now you might not have that at home, and if you don't feel like picking one of these up from here at eTrailer, what you can do is pack it by hand. And what you'll want is a big old tub of red grease. You'll get a glob of that in your palm, and then on the opened end of our bearing, which is this side right here, you can see this is wide open here, closed off on the other side. So this will just push through right between those rollers, get inside of there, and then squeeze out of the other side. And that's exactly what we're wanting. And then from there, we'll just smear a really good glob all over the entirety of it. And then this is actually, the larger one is going to be our inner bearing. Drop right into here. You can see it'll fit right in. Then we'll have our grease seal. We'll put a little dab of grease along the edge of it, just very fine coating of it. And then we'll slot that in. And I've got a punch, essentially, that I'm going to be using, which is just a hole saw that's larger than the bore hole here. So let's get these all greased up real quick, and then we can start building it all out. All right, when you see it coming out like that, you can then pull it back up. I like to try and grab like a little bit out of here and just smear it all over. Then I'll use my 2 fingers, put it through the inside so I can drop it in here without hopefully getting grease everywhere. That grease that's left over on your hand, you can just put right onto the next bearing. Drop that in. We'll just keep repeating this process. Now for the outer one, I'm just going to throw it right back on my paper towel here until we're ready to put that on, because this is going to be on the outside, which is going to require our assembly to already be in place. Took a little dab of it, and I'm going to smearing that all over the edge on our grease seal. This will help it slot in a little bit easier. Like I said, you don't want a lot, just real fine amount. You can also grease the inner lip as well. This little handle I have here, it used to be a seal punch where we had different size punch blocks essentially to go on there so it can match each size. This has kind of been used up to a point where it no longer works. The threads in here are all gone. What we're doing now is using a hole saw that's larger than our opening, and then I'm using this, but you could obviously use any kind of wood or steel or anything else you got in there to kind of hammer down with. And we're gonna just pop that right into place. And with this being a thicker metal, it's not gonna push the seal in past our lip here, which is exactly what we want. We want it staying just flush with that. If you go in too far, it'll end up damaging the seal and allowing grease to slip through and then just get all over our rotors. So, should have a nice flush feel all the way around. If you do feel like it needs to go in a little bit more, maybe just kind of move your hole saw over a little bit more or whatever you're using. I know in the past I used to recommend using a chunk of wood, like a 2x4 or something like that, that would fit within here, but I've had too many instances where the wood would be soft enough to where it would kind of push in a little bit too far, and then we end up with a seal and leaking over time, and that's not what we want. Now before we go and put our hub and rotor on, I'm going to put a good healthy glob of grease all over our spindle, just up to that inner bearing. And this is going to help us fill in the cavity so that way nothing else can get in there and sit, like water or anything. Next we'll slot on our hub and rotor. There we go. After that we'll have our outer bearing. Our flat washer, and then our axle nut, and then we're going to grab our torque wrench because we are going to torque this to spec, and then we'll back it off. And the whole point of torquing it down is it's going to fully seat our bearings, so that way there's no wiggle room to where we could then allow play with them, which will eventually end to them, or lead to them being damaged over time if there's any kind of wiggle play with it. What you're looking for here is you can grab each side of the rotor and you can kind of pull and push on it like this. And if you're getting any play like that, you don't have it tight enough. Once you hit that, double check it, see if you got any play. We don't have any play, so we'll back off. And then we'll do it hand tight until we can get our cotter pin in. And if you can't at that first one there, it's okay to back it off a little bit more. I think I'm going to back it off a little bit more myself here. And that's why this is a castle nut. This has got a bunch of different openings for you so you can get that through. Now this one's probably going to fight me just like it was when it was coming out, so I'll probably tap it in. Alright, it's in enough. It will be fine. We just need to then bend this up so that way it can't come out. All right, I'm just going to clean up any grease that we got on here. We don't want grease transferring over to our brake pads. And we can also grab out our dust cap, like to kind of just try to force it in a little bit by hand just to have it hold itself in place. Then I'll grab my wood. You may need to bend it a little bit. And what we're looking for is a nice tight seal, which looks like we are pretty good now. So all that's left is to put on the cap. But before we do that, I am going to grease it up just a bit. So while I'm pumping it through the grease zerk fitting, I'll also spin it so that way it kind of helps push it through. I typically won't go over like 5 or 6 pumps. We don't want to be crazy with it because I've already filled a lot of this in with that big glob that we put on when we were doing the spindle. But another good thing to do is just check the backside. Just double check that you didn't blow out your grease seal, which we're all good back here, so got nothing to worry about. We can put our cap on and we'll be all ready to go. So this is what our caliper looks like. We'll have this little rubber boot thing in here. You can toss that. That's just to keep these brake pads sitting where they need to be. What we need to do though is move our pistons back and the sleeves that they sit in. till they're flush, so that way when we slide this on, it'll actually fit. We'll have the piston side on the back, and then this front side will be right here. Now, while I have this out, and it's easier to see on camera, here's a good indicator for you. So here's your wear indicator on your brake pad. So as this starts to be used up, this will get closer and closer to this little edge right here, and when you get to that point, it's time to replace them. So once we have these on here, with the wheel on, you won't be able to see it, but if you ever took your wheels off to repack your bearings, you got this little window you can look in and see exactly where your brake pads are at and see if you need to swap them out. And if that is the case, it is super simple to swap them out without undoing your brake fluid or anything like that. You can leave those hoses on, just pop off your pistons, and then kind of slot it out. So it would be sitting on here and kind of come off. You'll have a little bit of wiggle room with that hose, which is going to connect right back here at this fitting, and then be able to just easily pop your brake pads out and replace them as needed. Okay, so we'll slot that up. And then I like to push in the little bolts here and try to find that opening in the caliper bracket. Now, using a 1/2-inch socket or wrench, you'll snug those down. And then we'll come back with our torque wrench and torque those bolts to the specs listed in the instructions. So at this point, our assembly is completely installed. The next part is going to be getting the rest of them all switched over, and then following that, we can figure out how we want to route our lines. So now's a really good time to also start checking out where you want to install your actuator. With this being a fifth wheel, there's always that front compartment area, which also usually houses the battery, and then there's usually all of your 7-way wiring somewhere inside of there, so it's easy to tap into. That is where I usually like to do it. I've already kind of scouted it out, and on our passenger side, there's an opening where there's just like a corrugated plastic kind of hiding a hole, so I can easily slide that out of the way, run our hoses through it, and then I'm going to come all the way back to our first assembly. We'll have a T that's going to shoot over to the other side and back to the second axle. Once we get back to this axle, there'll be another T, which is going to allow us to shoot over to the other side. We'll get all those hoses in place and buttoned up, and then I can show you exactly how to route it if you are doing the same at home yourself. We're up at the front. We have our cargo compartment open. We're going to need to get our actuator situated. We also need to figure out how we want to run our lines, and then also we're going to need to tap into our junction box so that way we can wire this in so it'll function properly. Now, before I go and mount this in and have it in that tight space, I want to actually put on the little fitting here that we have. This is a little 90-degree elbow fitting that's going to go right here. So either with a Phillips or a flathead. Looks like my flathead's a little bit too big, so I'm going to grab a Phillips. We'll pop that out and then screw that in with a 3/4-inch wrench. This is just a plastic plug, so it's not the end of the world if you tear it up, because we're going to be throwing it away anyway. And then from there, like I said, we're just threading in our 90-degree fitting. Actually, I'm going to loosen that just a bit. So this is going to go towards the back of our unit, at least for my setup. That's how I want it to go. And then I'll snug that down some more. Get this mounted up into our cargo compartment here, and I'm going to try to keep it as much out of the way as I can, but I still need to have access to tighten everything down too, so kind of keep that in mind. I might actually just hook on my hose first. I have a lot of excess hose left over because I've pushed it up to that first axle. So I'm going to wind it up inside of here so that way I don't have to worry about it getting damaged, and keeps a lot less slack outside. From there, I'll do this so hopefully you guys can kind of see it too. But from there, we can take our hose, tie that in, start by hand, and then after we get it tight by hand, we're going to grab our 10mm line wrench. Line wrench is going to get most of the sides here, but allow us to still slip through over that. and then we can tighten it. And you want to be careful. With these being brass, it's really easy to cross thread them. So we're just kind of going until it feels nice and snug. Now at this point, I can slide this back over. Get our wiring out of the way here. And then I'm just using 4 of the self-tappers that are included in our kit. And I'm just going to shoot those straight through this because this is a metal bottom here and I don't have to worry about anything below. I've already looked and we're all good over there. And what I can do is once we get this through, we can come back with our angle grinder and just cut the tips of these off so that way you don't get poked by it if you are reaching under there. Alright, now we're down below the trailer and I've got my hose line coming out. There's a little like hole, like half circle cut into the corner right here, right by our actuator. So I ran it right out and I tried to make this look super neat compared to some of the previous installs I've done, just because this is a brand new trailer and they actually gave us a lot of stuff that we could kind of tie onto. Now with the hose lengths, you kind of don't want to be right next to the frame rail. You want to be a little bit in, depending on what side you're going with, because you only have so much hose to run over from the T over to the other side of the axle. And you only have so much from that side that you're on down to the caliper for whatever side you're doing there. Now, I just popped out the screws here, put on my little hose clamp, put the screw right back up, and I just kind of kept tracing it all the way down till we get to our first axle. Once we got back here, I was wanting to tie up my hose line right here and use the T right at that point, but unfortunately that wasn't going to be long enough for my one little cable to run over to our caliper. The next cross beam that we have is right in this spot here. I did have to take out each one of these screws, pull down the corrugated plastic here, and kind of look in there and make sure I wasn't drilling into like a water tank or like the black tank or anything like that, because sometimes they will put it in between your suspension here, which not really something I recommend. But from there, what I did was I got like a scrap piece of metal about 22 inches long. I ran from this beam to this beam up above our corrugated plastic, and then I shot the screws in through the plastic so that way it would look all nice and neat here and we don't see that ugly scrap metal that I used just running from this bolt to this bolt. Now that gave me a mounting point here so I could put my T in, and I've got one of the self-tappers that they give you in the kit just shooting right through there. And at our T, we've got our hose running across to the other side of the axle. We've got our shorter hose running to this caliper. Here's the one running out towards the actuator, and then we have a medium-sized hose compared to the rest of them here where it's going to run back to that next T for our second axle. And hose clamps throughout. You want to make sure you leave a little bit of wiggle room, and I don't have any of these tightened yet, I will say. I wanted to show that on camera. So these are really just put in by hand. We need to come back with our line wrench and snug everything down before we even think about putting any fluid in. But I wanted to kind of go through and show how I routed it, and then the little things you can do to kind of take up some of the slack. So you can see I kind of put a bend in this just to take up a little bit more slack. A little bit's okay. If you can come down a couple inches, that's fine. But you don't want to be coming down multiple inches to where it could potentially snag on something. So same thing with it over here. I found this cross beam. So just kind of feel around, see where you can kind of push, and where you start to feel a solid beam in the corrugated plastic. That's a good spot to where you can run another hose clamp, or if you need to put in some kind of bracket or something like that to help hold it up. But once we come over to the other side of the axle, there's a gas line running from front to back of the trailer, or hydraulic line or something, and I just looped it right over that, had it kind of curved so it would take up a little bit of that slack, but not too much, because our suspension is going to compress and decompress here, so we need this to be able to go up and down. If we have it too tight, it's just going to rip the hose, and now we're without brakes and we're needing to repair a whole lot here, because we could potentially damage the caliper fitting as well, and then now we're replacing that on top of it all. Now back at the second axle, it's going to be the same kind of setup here. We just get up, we have our T, we got our hose shooting across, and our hose coming down to our caliper. Once we get to that point, it's just time to kind of start tightening things down. I'll leave the T's a little loose until I fully tighten it down, so that's why this is wiggling on us now, because you still need like a little bit of space to get the wrench in there. But since we're at this point, we can actually go ahead and just start tightening some of these down and show you how to do it. So once again, grab your 10mm line wrench, and then we'll just start tightening down each one of our connection points. It's definitely better to not overdo it because these are brass and you can kind of pinch them. And at this point, I might need to loosen this just a little bit more. There we go. Having a hard time getting on here. But it's a lot easier to cross thread these or just overall ruin them by over tightening it, and then you have a bigger leak and you're probably ruining the threads on not only the hose but also the tee. So now you're replacing multiple parts, and if you don't have a warehouse full of parts with you, not the best. Big time suck to have to wait for new parts to ship out to you. So maybe just throw under each one of your connection points, I would grab a paper towel, or if you have like the paper style shop towels, I'd throw those under each connection point. So that way if you start to see any drips, you'll notice it right away on that paper towel. But we've got these, all three of these are snugged down a bit. So down here, we've got this brass fitting at the back of our caliper. And once again, just till it's snug, but not so snug that you're cross-threading it. And then any kind of real loose stuff, like on the other side, I've still a little bit loose, more than I'd like. This one, not so bad, but I am gonna put another hose clamp probably right here just to help hold that. On the other side, there's a bit more to it, so DeeMaxx gives us some amazing zip ties that are real thick, and you should have a bunch of them in your kit. I'm gonna use some of those over here, just kind of zip tie it once I have it tight, just because I wanted to fully make sure I'm not doing it too loose or too tight until I have the actual fitting tight inside of our caliper. I've pushed a fish stick through, which you can see right here. I've got this little yellow stick. And what I'm going to use this for is to run some wiring between our actuator and our junction box, because we need to tie into power, ground, and then we also need to tie into our brake output and our breakaway switch. So we've got 10 gauge wire. I've got 2 sets of it because we got 4 wires we need to run. I'm going to tape them onto this fish stick, and then I'm going to use that to pull it over into our junction box. Okay, once we get over to our wiring over here, it's a little bit tighter of a fit. All right, now we got it over here. I'll leave some bundled up by our junction box. I'm going to route the other half of this over into the area where my actuator's sitting. So one thing I should have done before pushing my wiring through is mark one of them, since they're all the same color. So what I'm going to do to determine which one's which is just yank on one of them. You can figure out exactly which is which. And then we can mark it with some blue tape so we know, hey, this one's different than the other. One of them is going to be our power and ground. One of them is going to be for that brake output and for our breakaway switch. So I'll probably use this one for our breakaway switch and brake output just to kind of keep things color coded a little bit more the same. Strip back the casing a bit on our wire. Since this has some outdoor jacket on it, we don't really need that inside of here. From there, we'll have our 2 wires. We'll need to strip back the casing on as well. And I've got some heat shrink butt connectors. You don't have to use heat shrink since this is going to live inside of a compartment, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. Crimp those on. Now we've got our blue and our yellow that we're going to do. I'm going to put the white on here to the yellow for our breakaway switch. And then the black I'm going to go to our blue wire, which is our brake output. And we can take our heat gun. And then we're going to repeat this for the black and white as well, but I'm going to just match those black to black, white to white. We got it all cleaned up inside there and zip tied out of the way. I just kind of followed wires that were already there, so obviously everyone's going to be a little bit different. Just do your best to, like I said, keep it out of the way so that way you don't accidentally snag it. Now we can go back and work on our junction box. So there's already one tab where they opened it up. I'm going to just finish that off and pop it open the rest of the way. So that way I'm not making any more openings in here than we need. And then we can pass our wire through once we get that tab broken off. Now I'm going to trim this down a bit. So I'm going to grab my painter's tape again and remark my line, but I'll probably leave maybe like 5 to 6 inches in the box, and I can kind of wind that back up and push it in to get the lid back on. But there's a good foot and a half here that we don't really need. So once I find my tape real quick, I'll remark that and then we'll trim that down. I have my multimeter. We're going to start determining what each one of these wires is, and my first thing I'm going to do is find my power and ground. Now, good guess, going to be all the white ones is my ground, the red and black going to be my power, but we should always double check that and confirm it. So I'm using my test box right here. I'm going to send 12 volt power through here. If I pop this off and I put my multimeter on here and then into the ground, I should see 12 volts. If I see the opposite, then we know we got it flip-flopped. Yep, so we're getting 11.65 out of there. That doesn't shock me. My test box probably needs to be charged up back up again. Oh, there we go, 12.6, so. All right, now to show you the opposite here, say we had it flip-flopped color-wise, you can see there's a negative symbol there. Right there, that's telling me that we have it in the wrong orientation. So if we flip that back, right back to being positive, we know we're good. So this is our ground, this is our power. I'm going to turn that back off and I can put the power back on for right now. I'm going to focus on my ground. So we need our wire here, and like I said, we can trim this back just a bit. We don't need so much in here to where we can't close it up. And I'll strip back the casing on both of these, and then we can get our white tied in with the grounds here. Just twist all that together and put back on our wire nut. We'll finish that off with electrical tape. Make sure that this does not come loose. Now we can swap over to the power. I'll take that wire nut back off. And I think I'm gonna strip a little bit more so I can kind of really wrap it around there more. We've got a little crimp connector on all of our blue wires here. I've already uncrimped it a little bit, and we can pull that off, set that aside. Now, there's a couple things we're gonna do here. We've got 3 wires, and if you kind of look at them, you can see one's going up, and that's going out towards the electric brakes. This one, we're cutting that off, and we're gonna cap that because we no longer have electric brakes. We only have the disc brakes now, so we don't want there to be any power sending back to the electric brakes, because that wire could still somehow find a ground somewhere back there in some instances, and then it's gonna throw some codes in your truck if you have a factory brake controller, and that's not what we want to happen. So we'll separate this. I'm gonna leave it in here, obviously, just in case if someone ever did in the future want to switch this back to electric brakes, they always have it ready to go. But separating that is gonna save us some headache in the future. Now the other half of this is gonna be the 7-way, which is most likely that thicker wire. And then we have our breakaway switch, which is most likely going to be the thinner one. And if you look over at the breakaway switch over here, it's the same shade of blue and the same gauge. So we can take that as a safe bet that it is it, and you can see inside the junction box it is coming from the same wire loom that we have running to our breakaway switch. For this one, I'm going to be connecting that to the white wire, which is connected to the yellow wire on our actuator for our breakaway switch, and I'm just going to use a butt connector. You can use a wire nut again if you really wanted to, but in our case this will be good. Pop that one in. Let me twist that a little bit more. And I'll heat shrink that in just a bit, but our other wire here is that black one, which is running to the blue wire on our actuator. And for this, we can just twist these two together. And if you wanted to, like I said, you can reuse that wire nut, or you can use a butt connector. I'm just going to reuse that wire nut if I can. And I'll crimp that down nice and tight. Give it a little tug, make sure that doesn't come loose. And then, like I said, I'm going to heat shrink that just because we already used the heat shrink butt connector. Now we can just push all of our wiring back up in there and get our cover reinstalled. It's time to do a leak test and also bleed our brakes. We're going to be starting at the caliper that's furthest from our actuator. So if you trace your lines back, it's going to be the one all the way at that second axle and the one that's going to be further out. So we're going to be taking an 11mm line wrench, different from the one we had previously, which was a 10. We're going to also have some clear tubing, and I just have it running into a bottle, and that's going to catch the brake fluid as it goes through. We've got Joe over at the actuator, and he's going to be sending power to it so that it'll kick on and force that fluid back. And we're going to crack these open, and what we're looking for is those air bubbles. As they travel through here, it's going to be less and less each time that we do this, and essentially we're just trying to get all of those air bubbles out so that way we can have a nice, strong pressure with our brake fluid. So I'm going to crack this open and we'll have Joe start it. Now with the first one, you typically are going to have to put in a lot more fluid and really kind of get it to push through all the lines. So it may take a little bit before we start really seeing anything. All right, we're starting to. And you can see those little air bubbles kind of coming through. We'll get more as we keep pushing it.
All right, we're in fluid.
Yep, pause it. I'll crack it, or close it. We'll need to refill at this point, and then we'll do it again. And we'll just do it a couple times so that way we can get all those air bubbles through. And if you want, when you're doing this, try to lean it so that way you can get all that fluid out and not have it fall on you. All right, so we got some big bubbles coming through there. There's another one. All right, that's good. You want to refill it? I'm not really seeing any air bubbles, so we'll close that off. And like I said, we'll try to tilt this so it'll get most of that fluid into the bottle instead of all over us. There we go. We can put our cap back on. And now we're going to move over to the other side because, like I said, we're going to be working our way up to the actuator. So the next one in line is going to be the same axle, just over there. And this is also a great time to get under and take a look at your paper towels, see if any of your T's are leaking at all. I'm going to take my light with me too and just kind of check over it. And if you have some extra paper towels, like I do, you can also kind of rub on each connection point and just double check that nothing's leaking. And just make sure that when you're doing this, you are kind of crisscrossing back and forth, making sure that you're starting all the way at the rear one and then working your way forward like we did. Now that we've gone through each one of them, we're going to leak test one more time and see if there's any more bubbles we can get out of there. Now that we have gotten rid of the majority of those bubbles and we have more pressure coming from our actuator, this is going to be our real chance to see if there's any leaks under pressure. The original going under there and kind of checking is more so just to see if maybe you potentially didn't tighten it down quite enough. And this is now your under pressure test. So I'm going to walk back over to the other side. We'll go through all four of our assemblies again and make sure we have no leaks and plenty of pressure. All right, we've leak tested everything. We're doing good. Now, final test, we're going to pull our breakaway, make sure that we are getting that signal over at our actuator. So just Pop it out, you can hear it turning on, so that means we're good. We can pop this back in. And we are all good to go. All we have left to do is get our wheels back on and torque them to spec, and we're gonna be ready to stop on a dime. Well, that's going to do it for our look at and installation of the DeeMaxx disc brake kit with actuator for TA Maxwell trailers here in our 2025 Coachmen Chaparral Fifth Wheel trailer. My name's Kevin, and if you still have some questions about what's going to be the right disc brake kit for your specific trailer setup, please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out in your journey.